Joining us now is Jacob Glanville. He's the founder and CEO of Centivax, which is developing its own monoclonal antibody treatment for COVID-19 patients. Dr. Glanville, it's good to have you back on the show. As you've been listening to these updates, and particularly around the treatment mix that he's getting, basically all three of the leading promising candidates here for COVID-19, what are your thoughts on how early he's received them in the virus and what's going to happen?
So he has received these medicines earlier than is normal. Partially that's because he's the president. But in general, antiviral therapies are more effective the earlier you receive them. And that is the direction that I think increasingly we will go towards treating patients, is to try to provide them those therapies as early as possible so you can sort of stomp out the match before it becomes a forest fire.
What about Regeneron's monoclonal antibody treatment in particular? I know you're working on your own antibody treatment, which I think last you updated us a few months ago, it was working on hamsters. Where are you on that? And what do you think the Regeneron very high profile test case here is going to do for that company and that whole therapy?
Yeah, so I think this was a very high profile example of the power of applying antibody therapies. This still is an experimental therapy, but there's a reason why we use antibodies to treat scary things like Ebola and rabies. They're very effective, and they have already demonstrated that in their phase 2. The important thing is to provide them early. There were some risks here, but there's also risks of doing nothing. And so I think increasingly we're going to see that antibodies are an important part of the therapeutic landscape. Our therapy is in manufacture at MilliporeSigma and aiming to go into clinical studies early next year. Our unique aspect to the market is we think we want to give them even earlier. So IV immediately on arrival in hospital, but also an injection that people can take the day that they first find out they got sick. And the critical part there is to make it abundant and inexpensive. Increasingly, if we have those kinds of medicines available, even with a vaccine, we're going to continue to have lots of people like the president reach a hospital, and we need to make sure there's something there for them, and ideally something before they even have to get to the hospital.
But Dr. Glanville, to exactly that point, are they inexpensive? Is it realistic in the short term that these could be used very widely?
So that is an excellent question, and that gets to the heart of the matter. So antibodies historically have been thought of as very powerful medicines, but expensive boutique medicines. They're often charged at over $10,000 a dose. And obviously, we can't be in a position where many Americans, like the president, get sick. But unlike the president, they have to ask, maybe I should wait because that seems like a lot of money to find out if I don't need it. Antibodies don't actually cost that much to produce. The cost of goods is $100 or $200 a dose. So the majority of that additional cost is in the cost of paying for clinical trials and the cost of essentially corporate profit. So what I call for here now is for BARDA and Operation Warp Speed and the DFC to subsidize additional resources like they've done with vaccines, but now into the therapeutic space, to pay for the clinical trials and then ensure in exchange that we can offer affordable medicine. It is possible to make an antibody therapy that is life-saving and costs less than an iPhone.
So are you insinuating here that Operation Warp Speed was focused potentially too much on the vaccine front and therefore at the expense of these antibody treatments, which are going to be so key to getting us to a vaccine?
That's right. I think I've been trying to make that case since January. I felt that vaccines are very good and we're glad to get them. But the problem is, imagine we have vaccines January 1st, 2021. Not everyone's going to take them, and they don't work on everyone who receives them. You add those two things up, and then you add on top of that there's a 2-month time lag before they kick in, and you're going to run into the continuing problem of having our hospitals overrun with COVID-19 patients throughout 2021. A therapy, on the other hand, a treatment, can end the crisis. The minute you have an effective treatment in the hospitals, it's not so scary to get sick anymore, and this downgrades from a medical crisis to a manageable infectious disease. The problem so far is that Warp Speed and BARDA and other funding agencies have put over $10 billion into vaccines and less than $1 billion into antibody therapy. And so I would strongly call upon the White House and these funding agencies to increase their support of these therapies so that it's not so scary to get sick anymore.
How much would they cost, Dr. Glanville, if you remove the corporate profit part of this from the equation, which I think you said was one of the two?
Yeah, so the main way that you actually calculate how much a medicine costs is very different than, say, my parents who had a hotel and a restaurant. We would decide how much the peas and carrots cost, and then you add a little bit of service on top of that, and you make a profit. That's not how drugs are charged, cost. The estimates for drug cost is how much suffering the insurance company is going to have if they don't have your drug. So if they're going to have to pay $20,000 a patient if they don't have your drug, but if they have your drug, it's going to cost less, you can charge them $10,000 and they'll save them money. That's not really an appropriate charge model for this current circumstance where we have essentially a limitless supply of sick people and we need to give lots of the medicine. The cost of goods is $100 to $200. On top of that, you need the distribution, manufacture, and a man's got to eat, so you need some profit. But I think $400 to $500 a dose is a very achievable way that we can create a medicine that's affordable to everyone in America.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.